carrying shame is not something that anybody should have to do or should be doing, but that's also to carry any kind of guilt. But if I can be honest, we have all done things or have had things happen to us that sometimes cause us to feel guilty. And then maybe even that brought on some level of shame into our lives. And so today we're going to talk about handling guilt and shame. Welcome to the You, Me, and Jesus podcast. On this podcast, I share all about my experiences growing up with God, growing into the calling that God has had on my life, and experiencing the supernatural. When you're listening to this, you're going to hear from me as well as many of my friends talk about all the experiences we have with God. Some of the things you're going to hear are going to make you go, what? I cannot believe that happened. Other things are going to make you cry, and some things are just going to make you laugh. But you're going to hear all about how we experience God. The goal of this podcast is to help you hear God clearer, get closer to God, and experience all of the supernatural. And so thank you so much for listening to the You, Me, and Jesus podcast. So welcome back to another episode of the You, Me, and Jesus podcast, where we talk about all things you, me, and Jesus. I am so excited to be here with you today. Even though this is not an exciting topic or a fun topic, it is something that I felt like that we should talk about. I have dealt with it, and I'm sure you or someone you know in your life has dealt with guilt and dealt with shame. And so I'm excited to talk about this because I feel like it's going to bring some people some relief. It's also going to make you feel like that you're not alone. And then maybe it's going to give you, some tools to be able to offer to someone in your life that is dealing with this. So when I thought about, dealing with guilt and dealing with shame, there's so many different reasons why a person or people could be feeling guilt and could feel shame. Okay. Now, all the time here on this podcast, I always talk about my own life. And so because it's one thing for me to go and just give you tips and tools and things of that nature. And it's another thing for me to be able to say, hey, so here is what I have dealt with. Here is how I felt in that time. And then here is the process I've gone through in order to navigate it. And so that is what we're going to be talking about. So when I thought about the topic of guilt and shame, I have felt that in so many different areas of my life. And I want to just kind of unpack some of those and the processes I've kind of gone through to navigate that. I can't say that I'm 100% shame-free or 100% guilt-free. I can just say I'm on the other side than where I was a year ago. Okay. So for example, that I talk all the time about the fact that I went through a divorce, okay? What you may not know is that I used to judge people that had gone through divorce, okay? And I don't even know why I judged people, especially because I grew up in a house where my mom had a lot of divorces. I can't even 3, 4, 5, maybe divorces or whatever. My dad has been divorced, I think 4 or 5 times, and so I don't even know why I had this, thought process about divorcees. Probably because I had this unrealistic, picture of marriage of this is what it looks like, and if I am like this and he is like this, then everything's gonna be amazing. Maybe because I love Jesus, and if he loves Jesus, then everything's gonna be perfect. I think maybe because I had that type of mentality, and so when I would encounter people or see that people were or had gone through a divorce, I think I had the thought process or whatever that they weren't enough. They weren't doing enough. They weren't whatever. You know what I mean? And which is crazy to say that out loud, but I'm like, it was the reality. And so when I started my journey of getting married. I was like, okay, like I'm going to cook all the time. I'm going to be sexually active with my spouse, all the things. I'm going to be, he's going to be, everything's going to be. And I quickly realized that, oh yeah, we talk about me being human and we talk about him being human and all the things that go along with people and their humanness and what they are sharing and not sharing and doing and not doing. And so when I went through divorce, I carried a lot of shame. And, I think, okay, so why did I feel shame about going through divorce? Okay, so I felt shame about going through divorce because I got married to stay married, right? I was very excited about getting married. I was very public with, announcing the engagement, the countdown to getting married. I was very excited about forever or whatever, the idea of forever. I don't think I was that excited about him. I think I was more so excited about marriage or whatever I thought marriage was going to be. And so then having to basically tell the whole world I'm getting divorced or I'm not married anymore was like huge, because here was how I, was displaying everything. And then now it was like, here's what was displayed and here was the truth once it came out, Then it was around like, are people going to think that I'm the reason that we got divorced? Is it because like I'm an entrepreneur, I'm very like I'm very driven and things of that nature, and there were people that made it seem like that I couldn't have it all. I couldn't have marriage, family, and a successful career, and I felt like shame and embarrassment that I was crushing it in my business, but I wasn't crushing it in my marriage or whatever. And so I felt shame around that and guilt that maybe if I wasn't as driven, maybe he wouldn't be cheating or have cheated or whatever, But I also felt guilt because, let's see, why did I feel guilt? Guilt around divorce. I felt guilt because, I don't know the exact word about guilt, but I know I felt shame. I felt like I could have been enough. I wasn't enough or all that stuff, And that was and is a journey of overcoming, because you're talking about you versus public perception, right? You talk about you versus whatever else the story he is telling. You know what I mean? You're talking about you versus the people that knew you too and had opinions or whatever, all the things, you know what I mean? And there was nothing I could do about that. So it was like, no matter what I could say online or no matter how I could show up online, people were still going to perceive whatever. They were still going to think whatever. And I couldn't control it. I could not control whether or not we stayed together or we didn't. Who knew we were getting divorced, who didn't. I couldn't control any of that. And so then now I am divorced, right? So it became that like, here I was like single, married, and now I'm divorced. Now I've got this title that when they ask, am I single, married, divorced, I have to like check this title that I never thought that I was ever going to check. And over the last 10 years, I've had to go through the journey of like accepting being a divorcee, accepting the fact that I can no longer check single. I can no longer check married. That I can check single if I want to, but technically I should check divorced, right? And I carried so much shame around that because it was just like, I couldn't control it. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't do anything to make this not be my reality. And the process that I have gone through to heal, right, from that has been interesting. I've done a lot of therapy anyway because I just value it, because I'm like, I'm a human and I'm like working on my life just through and through, But through therapy, what I kind of like finally came to terms with was that I get this choice of wishing that I would never got married, so I would never be divorced, or just accepting the fact that I got married, he was unfaithful, I am now divorced. And it took quite a bit of time to come to that reality of like, I am divorced. And just because I'm divorced doesn't mean I am broken. Doesn't mean that there's something wrong with me. Doesn't mean that I'm not lovable. Doesn't mean that I did something wrong, right? And, that had to be a process between me and God. I did a lot of it in therapy, but it had to be me and God, because there was nothing anybody could say to me, to tell me otherwise. I felt the way that I felt. I felt ashamed. I felt embarrassed. I felt all of those things. And in order for me to really come to terms with that, accept it, and be okay with it, I needed God to come along and say, hey, this is just another stage of your life. Like, just like gaining weight and losing weight, stretch marks, no stretch marks, like the same deal that happens with all that is like, this is just a stage in your life that you have gone through. And you don't need to feel shame and embarrassment and guilt about something that you couldn't control. And, it took a while for me to like come to terms with that. But I was finally like, yeah, I was not unfaithful to my spouse. I was not. I had forgiven him and wanted to try to work through it, but he was still out doing his thing. And once I kind of finally came to that conclusion, or that like emotional like stability moment or whatever with that, is when I was able to be like, okay, like this is that happened, but being divorced is not my identity, right? But you don't just wake up one day and go, divorce is not my identity. Like, you can say that, but to truly believe it, it was a process. So I had to give myself the permission to let God love on me, let God comfort me, and let God like rebuild me up to the point to where I don't carry that shame. Now, I did carry shame around weight gain, because during that time I lost 50 pounds and then I just started gaining all this weight or whatever, right? But also I started these tumors started growing in my stomach. And for the longest time, I just carried so much shame around my body size. It was like my stomach was so big, looked like I was 7 months pregnant, and I was gaining weight or whatever, right? And I carried so much shame because I didn't know what was going on with my stomach. I thought I was just fat, right? And it wasn't until I went to the gynecologist and had to have an MRI, ultrasound, and all this stuff. And one of the techs, which they normally don't say anything when they're doing their exam, but for whatever reason, this one tech said, "Whoa, wow, that's a huge tumor in your stomach." And I was just like, I'm trying to understand what she's saying, because they normally don't talk to you much. And she was just like, "Well, you see that?" And she's like poking around at my stomach. She goes, "This is why that's so hard," and she starts explaining to me about the tumor and how hard they are and all this stuff. And it was kind of like almost instant that like the shame that I felt around my stomach being so big broke off. And it was because I thought that it was my fault. Like, I thought that I was just fat because how I was eating, that I just had a fat stomach. But I realized that I was estrogen dominant. And so estrogen produced this whole situation going on with these tumors in my stomach. And the shame just kind of broke off. But I was dealing with that shame of like how I was looking for years. I mean, I was so sad about how I felt about myself. And then it broke off, and then I've had surgery, and now I'm just on the mend and all that type of stuff. But in all of that, there was this time frame where God was just like, hey, so there's all these things that are attached to you. And he just started like helping me see, like, you feel shame and guilt and embarrassment around this, all these things. And I'm like, I break that up. I'm doing all the spiritual things. I break it off in the name of Jesus and da 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 da. And what he started to show me was that, like, all of this is going to be a process, that the feelings you had around divorce going to be a process till you get to the point of okay, right? Like, it was a process of me realizing what was growing in my stomach, to where I got to the point where I'm like, oh, there's that, to where I had the surgery and I still, like, even right now, like, I'm touching my stomach and it feels weird to touch my stomach because my stomach is normally like out to here hard or whatever. And it's like pushed back in, it's soft, back to normal or whatever, right? And well, not 100% normal because I like gained a lot of weight. So I'm like trying to tighten things up and all that. But once I had the surgery and I had these moments, like the first moment was, what did I do? I put on a dress and I was in shock when I looked in the mirror of that I could fit this dress. And I was just like, I saw my body, and then I put on another dress. And then one day I put on my bathrobe and I was in shock about like how my stomach looked in my bathrobe because I was used to it sitting out, Then I put on this night jacket, shirt and shorts or whatever. And I was just in shock about how the shorts and the shirt fit me. And I've been on this journey like since December of being like, okay, like we got this new normal, we got this new body, and the shame that I was feeling around my stomach and all that, it quote unquote broke off. But now I'm on the mend of like accepting and learning and loving the body again or whatever. So basically what I'm trying to say here is this, that if you are currently dealing with guilt or dealing with shame, one of the first things you have got to do is you've got to figure out what is the root of this. What is the root of your guilt? What is the root of your shame? Because you could think that it's just weight gain or whatever your thing is, but you've got to really come to the root and find out what that is. And what I have learned is that the best way for me to get to the root of the thing is to ask God to give me the root. Because what I think or thought may have been the root ain't it, right? That it's much deeper than that. So I had this time where I was doing like deliverance ministry, like, getting it done on me or whatever. And I've been doing it for years now. I'm just like, let's just go through the process. And I use the same lady, and we've been working together for like 5 years or whatever. And we had this one session where we were talking about something. I don't know what it was. And then all of a sudden I start seeing a vision of my grandpa when he passed away, like basically in the living room or the hallway of our apartment many years ago. And then I could hear myself crying, and I'm just telling her what I'm seeing, what I'm experiencing. And then suddenly in real life, I start to cry. Now, I've never cried in those sessions with her. Not that I didn't want to, it was just, I didn't feel the need to cry. And so I started to cry. And then I could hear myself in my head screaming, I want to go with you. Talking to my grandpa, because he was like my favorite person on the planet. And then so I'm just crying and letting myself cry. And she's dead silent because she's been with me for years and I've never cried. And she's just allowing whatever. And I'm just going through this process. And then finally I'm just like, wow. And we just start talking through the emotions that I was feeling going through that process. And like, I don't even know I can't remember exactly why we had that happen in the session, but I came to the session trying to deal with A. And then Z showed up, and Z came to the root of a thing. So there was a part of me that was kind of like dead, because I was like, I just want to go with my grandpa since I was like 13 years old or whatever. And I felt like God was saying to me, like, hey, so here is a part of you that kind of died that day. And so we're dealing with that so that we can resurrect you again to be your full self again, because that part is dead and it needed to come back to life. And so I'm like, who knew that was a thing that I was dealing with, you know? But because of going to the root of things, there's things that I did not know what I was dealing with until I intentionally was just like, let's just go on a journey of healing and all the things so I could be my very best self, you know? So for you, you're dealing with guilt, shame around whatever the thing is, or all the things that are. And one of the first things you're going to need to do is ask God to give you the root of the thing. Because you cannot heal things on the surface. So what you see today is just surface. There's things deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper down under. And until you actually go there, there's only so far you can go in other aspects of your journey, you know? That's like, I remember when I had started going through the process of of therapy after divorce, and she said, what do you want to talk about? And I was like, well, I don't want to focus on my ex-husband. I was like, I want to focus on what made me choose my ex-husband. And she was like, why? I was like, because there's a reason why I chose him as a partner. Let's go back to my childhood. And the more we went into my childhood, absent father, all this stuff, it's like, this is why I feel the way that I feel about myself and would choose a partner like him. Not a bad person, so to speak, you know, but it was like, I chose him for a reason. And so because of all those root types of work, nowadays, when I am looking for like a potential life partner, I look at men totally different now. Like what I'm looking for is totally different than what I chose 10 years ago, because we're getting to the root of my issues versus just, you know, surface level, what happened with him or whatever. Does that make sense? Okay. So again, if it is your goal to be set free from guilt, shame, embarrassment, and things of that nature, you've got to go to the root of things. And the best way to do this is by going to God. Okay. I believe in therapy. I do therapy all the time. I'm all about it. Right. But in addition to therapy, you need to also talk to Jesus. Okay. You need to talk to Jesus, because he can give you insight into a thing that your therapist can't give you. And your therapist can help you navigate through with different tools, the things that God illuminates, right? Because if I only focused on Jesus, there's certain tools that I have today I wouldn't have. And if I only focused on therapy, the therapist can only give me what I have shared with her or him or whatever. But with Jesus, he can give me all of what's really going on, and then they can give me tools to deal with all of that. Okay. All right. So I hope you found this episode valuable. I always like to know, what are your thoughts? So if you enjoyed today's episode, please let me know in the comments. If you got any questions, let me know. If you are listening to this and you enjoy, please write a review. The only way people find this podcast is when you write a review and you share it with a friend. Okay. So thank you so much for listening and watching. Thanks for listening to the You, Me, and Jesus podcast. I'm so honored and thankful that you have chosen to listen to this with us. What we would love more than anything next is for you to write a review. When you write a review on iTunes or Spotify, it actually helps the podcast be found by more people. So if you can do us a huge favor and give us 5 stars and write a review, and feel free to tell us what you loved about the episode. Thank you for being here. We're praying for you. We love you, and we pray the best for you and your life.